Shalom. Hi. So for me, it really is an opposite action to give my first ever lecture in English because I do not speak. Thank you. Thank you for encouraging me. I do need it. And actually, I kept the name when Tzachi asked me to speak here 2 or 3 months ago, I think. That was the name that was on my mind, but later on, as I started writing it or thinking about it, it changed. It changed a bit, and I'll talk about it. My name is Yoray. I'm a DBT LBC certified clinician, and I put a team here in Israel. We work in the Sharon region, near Kfar Saba. We are 8. Sorry?
To close the door?
Yeah, but people keep entering, so I'm not sure if it's effective.
Okay.
But I hope you can hear me. So, we're around 8 or 9 therapists in our team, and I'm the head of the team, and I'm happy to thank you, and I thank you, Emunah. And I'm happy to be here today, speak to you, because for me it's important to talk about DBT whenever I can. But this is more, I think, a personal lecture, a talk. I'm afraid I cannot stand behind this pretending name and just give you some impression of how I am trying to use DBT principles and philosophy in my day-to-day life as a person, as an Israeli, as someone who is coping with all that there is to cope nowadays. And you know that it's believed, and we always say it, that real therapists who do DBT should do what they preach or what they tell others to do. And it's very important for us to practice skills and think and formulate our thoughts in DBT ways, and not just talk about it, but actually live upon DBT. So actually my friend here came to see the lecture or to hear me, and she fled. She escaped the room because I made a mistake, and I showed her some of the visuals, and it was so heavy for her, so she just preferred to go somewhere else. And you might also be a bit anxious about talking about atrocities, but I'm not going to be explicit around that. And the most explicit thing you're going to see, I think, is the art that I'm showing here. So the presentation is made only, almost no words, but only from art that was made during the last year by contemporary Israeli artists following the catastrophe. And there you have the name, but I don't know a lot about it anyway. So,
Yoray, where is this? Do you know where?
no. Some other pictures I think I wrote when I saw or when I knew, but how would you say the Otef Aza? How would you call it? Because envelope. All right. So it's all around there. So with the onset of the war, many therapists, independently or organized groups, or in organized groups, mobilized to assist the immediate first hours and days after the disaster. In November, I myself joined Chosen Eshkol. I guess most of you know what it's about.
I don't know
So Chosen is an organization that around 15 years ago, as the situation in the south deteriorated and people were suffering from rockets, so a lot of children were suffering from stress disorders, and they wanted to divide it from mental health services, and they said it's not that someone is ill or mentally, but people, especially children, but not only, need to have more resilience, resources, and how to deal. So there were a couple of few Chosen centers in the north, in the south, and they worked according to principles that were established here and outside of Israel. How do you deal with continuous stress like this? So Chosen Eshkol is a center like this. It's in Eshkol in the south, and they established a branch in Eilat to support the evacuated. For instance, I worked with Nir Oz community. I continued to meet on a weekly basis survivors as they moved also to Kiryat Gat, working with them until recently, but not anymore. I didn't expect, of course, to use DBT in this case, nor did I actually use DBT. While we as therapists, DBT therapists, work regularly with trauma victims, DBT wasn't designed specifically for acute war trauma, especially nor for the early stages of psychological first aid. However, given its practical and human-centered nature, DBT, as a principle-driven approach, turned out to be ready-made, effective framework for this new complex situation. Over time, as DBT has been adapted for various populations and settings, it may also be tailored for those affected by war and natural disaster. I don't think I'm going to take part in that, but who knows, one day. You know, DBT started for borderline female harming themselves, trying to kill themselves, and then we had all kinds of adaptations that were made later. And as the war started, I wondered, is there going to be a war DBT? Who knows? But I think we're doing some war DBT. Let's see how. And again, I'm not at this point, I'm not trying to create a formulated DBT model for such work, nor will I deal extensively here with treatment for cases of PTSD among survivors of the massacre I met. Because I actually met people who were suffering or still suffering from PTSD, but this lecture is going to be more about us as human beings living here, and how can we see what we're doing in through the lens of DBT. And this way, let this principle guide us and to provide us conceptual framework around what's happening. Next, I'll discuss several familiar to you, I hope, DBT skills, but this time in the context of the past year's event. But first, I'd like to outline a bit trivial, but just to state the obvious, the unique risk factors and traumatic aspects related to the situation that began that sad day. So let's begin by distinguishing very elementary three concepts around trauma. So the first is a trigger. The trigger for psychological trauma would be any perceived, of course it should be perceived, distressing or life-threatening event. So that's a trigger. Then some will develop a trauma, but this is not yet a PTSD. You can think about it like as a acute stress reaction involving a strong emotional response to any perceived trauma triggering event, and that would often be manifested by helplessness, intense fear, perception, or cognitive transient impairment, sleep disruption, and disrupted sense of safety. Whereas PTSD is a diagnosis, it's diagnosed when these responses persist long after the threat has passed, with key symptoms including, of course, avoidance, intrusiveness, and heightened arousal. That means, in DBT way of speaking, a sense of fear in the absence of a real danger, right? So what are we facing? And I'm not talking about people who are or were direct victims, but there may be people here who have lost or were direct. But when I say we, I refer to most people who were affected, but maybe not directly. So what are we facing? We're living in this ongoing, evolving event. Just consider the last days or last week. It's unbelievable the amount of news and things that's happening every minute. I mean, before the lecture, I took a glance in Ynet, and if I return now to see, I may have more 3 bullets. People were killed, bombs are falling, and things are happening. So this is really tough for all of us. We know when it started, but we don't know how, when, maybe even if, and how again it will end. And the way it started was abrupt, sudden, and unforeseen. And we know that such a beginning of an event is a significant risk factor for trauma. Like if you had one driver seeing a car from behind about to hit him, and then another driver would not see the car that's coming to hit him, psychologically they are in a whole different situation. And we didn't see it, right? We went to sleep, we woke up in the morning, and then our world has changed, and that's a risk factor. So it brings ongoing anxiety, feelings of detachment, and crisis of trust towards, well, it depends, but those who were in charge to help and assist us and make it not happen, but it did. So it keeps us in a constant state of vigilance and alertness. Non-stop triggers mean non-stop danger signals. So this is our reality. We get sirens, we get news, we get all kinds of triggers that actually tell us that the world is dangerous at the moment, a year after it all has started. So it's really not appropriate to think about it as an event that happened and ended, and now we can do something about it because, you know, any minute we can have an alarm here. I will stop talking, we'll all run to the safe. How many of you have already checked and know by now where to go to if the siren goes on? You don't? Well, I did my homework. Well, you'll follow me. Actually, I saw the sign. I don't know how far it is. It could be 1 kilometer, but I will go. We'll walk there. So, in DBT, we would say that much or most of this emotional response that we're having is how would we say? Justified, right? It's justified. It's not a fear or anxiety that is not justified. It's justified under the circumstances, meaning that true healing cannot yet be expected as things are still happening and evolving. So once again, forgive me for the harsh, for the difficult visuals. As I said, I think this is the most difficult in my lecture. No, more than this, you're not going to have.
Sorry, the artist is not. I can't read the Hebrew. Your turn.
So, write me, I'll tell you. We know that according to DBT-PE, for those of you who are familiar with that, trauma treatment should wait until there's symptoms stabilization and an end to active threat. But at this point, isn't our reality. And so the appropriateness of trauma work is questionable. And I remember that I have been working with survivors from the Oz. Some of them had family still there. And it was very difficult to approach to any work of to work through the trauma, and we didn't do it actually, because you think one thinks that he has more prioritized work to do, like to bring them back home. Of course, how can you deal with your own suffering if your brother is still there? So actually, I think that this artist, I didn't talk with her, she meant to portray the situation in the safe room that day. But I took it as it's still happening in a way, not the same way, not the same helplessness whatsoever, but in a way, this is still our situation, not theirs only. And this is a hard one, of course. I want to talk about some unique feature of the trauma, because this war, like never before, has exposed us to explicit, horrific atrocities like never before, right? And it was online and how would you say? The streaming. It came about in a stream way, overwhelming ever since from all kinds of media. So you cannot avoid, you cannot actually escape the news, which are, I would say, conventional news, right? This isn't conventional. This is like atomic news for us. Nothing have prepared us, but the Holocaust that we have back in our minds to consume such news, like a less than 1 year old boy being kidnapped with his family, or things like that, right? So we are bombarded with visuals and with story that is too much for us. And I'm not talking again about people who encountered or participated in these events just by secondhand, just by witnessing. This is enough for us. And I'm sure I'm not alone in having difficult from time to time to fall asleep, because I see visuals although I was not there. So how many of you experience that, having nightmare while awake, right? Thinking about our family, about ourselves. So this is a very strong example of a secondary traumatization that we all feel in a way like we are part of it, or we are there, or we could have been there. And it could have been our daughter or our son there now. So that's one key unique feature. Yes.
Could you take this down? Thank you.
Yeah, I'm not sure that what's going to happen is much better, but you know, that's what we're living now, and this really tells you something about the how strong the urge to, like I told you, my friend who saw the visual, she just fled. She couldn't take it, and it. I think those images, as I said, they resonate and replicate our Holocaust worst nightmare that's coming now true again. No, here. So helplessness and abandonment and neglect of survivors dealing alone with the reality. So we know that the intelligence were not really was not hands-on what was happening there. No, and we were just lucky is that these kind of events did not occur also in the north, but we actually neglected the security for fact. And then when things happen and you know that people who live there and they know they are in Kitat Konenut, Kitat Konenut, say it.
Local security team.
So they know that they should stand on for about 15 minutes until the first security forces would arrive. But how long did it take here? It took 3 hours for the minimum, and then 7, 8, 12 hours till anyone came. So just imagine waiting, talking, explaining on the phone, and nobody comes. So that's a unique. And for instance, one of my patients was suffering from an anger problem. He was not as sad as much. He was angry, and what helped him is to take people for tours in the kibbutz, and especially high ranks officers from the army, to show them what they went through, and that helped alleviate just a bit the anger, so everyone will know what happened during all those hours.
Can I say something? I just wanted to say that I think the lack of response was almost like gaslighting. It's like this isn't real. It's like you're experiencing, so you're being traumatized, and you're being traumatized about the trauma.
And that's exactly
without getting help.
the next thing I want to say, because we know that traumatic invalidation, are you familiar with that, with this term? So traumatic invalidation can involve neglect or disregard, a profound misreading or misunderstanding of your emotions, your thoughts, or your need. So that's exactly what you were saying, like, I'm really going to die here and nobody's coming. How transparent am I? How unseen can one be? So sitting with kids in the mamad, in the safe room, there is, have been set, the whole house has been set on fire and nobody's coming. And what does it mean for us that our brothers and sisters were there like that, and we actually couldn't help them, couldn't assist? Well, to me, it's really difficult. I think a lot about would I do something different had I known what's going to happen? I want to say something about the therapist position. So normally and ideally, but maybe more utopically, not really, the patient has these problems and we're safe. Well, it's not the case, because you know that we in DBT adopt the idea of like compassion, which one of the three ingredients of it should be common humanity. So we share the very same problems of our clients, right? But not always at the same time and not at the same amount. So the patient has his problems and his life, and we observe it from outside, and there we can give consultation. But what happens if the patient that comes to you and you are in the very same boat? So he doesn't sleep and you don't sleep, and he has nightmares and you have nightmares, and he has lost someone and you've lost someone, or lost faith, or lost hope, or lost a person, or lost an idea. Of course, DBT would advise us to do what? What do you think about? What are you thinking about? I would think about self-disclosure, because it is what it is. So we're now in the very same boat, confronting same difficulties. We can talk about it, and I can advise. For instance, I had really problematic sleeping in the beginning of the war, and I don't have problems in sleeping. I sleep well, at least I used to. Something is changing regardless of the war, but I don't have a problem to discuss with my patient what helps me and what's not helping me in achieving a better sleep, right? I can do that. I hope you can do that. It depends when, where, how, who's the patient. But for me, it worked.
Yoray, can you go back one slide? I wonder if we could look at it another way, what you were talking about, where people were completely abandoned in the sense of absolute isolation.
One more back.
This one here, and the sense of such isolation and abandonment that they can't let anyone into that therapeutic space anymore. I'm reminded of, there was a meal with a Rosh Hashanah that I was having with an art therapist who went to volunteer in the Dead Sea, which is where the Be'eri community was, and she was working with the youth, and one of the things that struck her is that the youth would not actually let any older therapists or clinicians or any adults in. They really stuck to themselves for this fear of being completely let down or abandoned, and this sort of breakdown in trust. And how is it possible now to bridge that gap for people who, in a very fundamental way?
I think patients may not want therapists to be close too much. They want you to be in perspective when it's normal. But in this condition, it makes sense that it will be much easier to have in someone who maybe resembles you or suffers the same, maybe. Anyway, I felt that connecting with children is always more difficult. I work seldom with youth and adolescents. When I tried now, it didn't work at all, because it's really hard to make the alliance and start working with kids, because they tend to avoid more than adults. They just want to return to normality and play. Sometimes it's not a good idea for them. They better have treatment, but it takes a lot of expertise with children. So just a way to say how much we all were affected. So this is a book, Emunah, that's for you, because that's the logo of Chosen Eshkol. And this is a book, Shirat HaTrigger, the trigger singing. It's a book made for kids. How they can, there are many topics that you can find books for children explaining, like psychoeducation or even literature. And this is a kind of book like this that the author is a psychologist, or actually I think she was a social worker, formed the envelope, but she was murdered that day. She's gone, she's not with us from that day. But she left this heritage. So think about it. I went to work with Chosen. I joined them as kind of volunteer. And I had colleagues, therapists, who lost one of them during, and now they need to treat others while she is one of the casualties. So it really touched many of us. And although I'm not talking about victims, right? These are victims or survivors, but there's a lot of self-invalidation of victims and non-victims, or I would say not direct victims, because we're all a kind of victims. So if you know that there's a lot of guilt and shame, so while I was not murdered, how come I am still alive, is a thought that may stand in the way of receiving help. I do not deserve help, one would think, because I escaped. And by escaping, I let them kill my friends. So they might not take therapy, but think of our patients who are not in the party, who are not in the envelope villages and kibbutzim, but they want to talk about their difficulties nowadays, or just general difficulties that they suffer from. How can they? So I had one patient, she left and she didn't return. She left because she said, morally, I cannot participate in a therapy when nothing actually happened to me. You should save this seat for people who really need it. So that's another difficulty, I think, and even ourselves. Is it okay to treat people for normal problems, whereas people are struggling with huge problems? So that can be therapy interfering thoughts on the part of therapist or the patient. And you know that self-invalidation is one pole of those two poles in the axis, where the other is emotion vulnerability. So one time you feel like very vulnerable, and then you say, I don't need therapy, it's not for me, because nothing happened to me. That's an example of this dilemma that Marsha talking about.
I'm glad you have a slide like that.
I didn't hear you.
Just to take a break.
Yeah.
So I'm saying I'm glad we have
Yeah.
nice.
And as you can see, it's softening now.
Yeah, we need
We're now going to talk about skills. Yes.
I just wanted to kind of add maybe
Talia, is that you first time in person?
I just wanted to add for a moment, because I think the question was asked, so it's okay to address it, about working with the families, and for the kids, because so much of what we know from DBT for kids, DBTC, is how much support, when we give the support to the parents, we might not have access to the children. They might not let us into that circle, but we might have a little bit more access to the parents. And what we did here in Yerushalayim was a lot of like the CPP work, and also working with the parents that we could work with, and how important that is to be able to give the parents the skills,
Right.
to be able to support the children. So I just wanted to
Totally. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, Tyler. Okay. So now, let's take a look at specific skills. While again, I'm not presenting a formal skill set for war trauma. I just hope to share some conceptualization through the DBT lens, as I said. The past year, as a member and interim chair of the Israeli DBT Therapy Association, we've participated or we initiated a meeting, gathering of therapists. It was around the mid of the war, half year into the war, with fellow therapists, and we just discussed that idea of DBT skills for us during the crisis. And here I want to share with you some examples. And I think it will be a bit easier, though the first one is not very easy, but no, the second. Okay, let's see. So ABC, you know, ABC, please, is our skills to lower down vulnerability factors, right? Because if we're hungry, if we didn't sleep well, if we didn't take the medication or took too many alternating mood substances, what people do, and you know, we don't judge people for what they do to regulate emotions or to try to get sleep or to. So we do know by now that addictions go up for sure, and sleep goes down. People do all kinds of things to avoid sleep, to hear more news when it's not really necessary, and people neglect themselves. I saw in Ynet a screening of some preliminary research about partnership and how and if and how it affected sex life, and it did, of course, because few reasons. So people are losing resources and may adopt unhealthy behavior that by time will, you know, get to a circle, a vicious circle. They have less resources, they cope less well, and goes on and on. So how important it is to stick to healthy and skillful ways. And I can tell you that, of course, this is once I started to adopt it to myself, because I didn't sleep well. Perhaps I had too much alcohol, I don't know. I advised my patient to do what I did, to start and take care of myself. It really is important, and it's more important when you have children to take care of, right? Another skill is contribution. So this is a skill I often I didn't appreciate that much. I didn't understand it so much. I don't know if you know that DBT shares the skill with a 12 steps approach. Humar Jalinan called them twins, but not from the same mother. That's how she called it. In the first weeks of war, the country was filled with initiative, community services effort, that supporting reservist families and so on. I'd like to ask how many of you took part in it. Can anyone relate to how it changed mood or sense of vitality, right? So I did few contributions, volunteering. It blew my mind how effective it was to distract me and to strengthen me. Sorry?
Have agency.
Agency, yeah.
Doing
To,
something that brings
yeah. And it really changed. No, we started too late. So it's 5 plus 5. So contribution is one thing. Another thing is opposite action, and I want to tell you 2 stories. So one, we live in a community that borders a separation fence with the Palestinian Authority. A few days after October 7th attack, late in the evening, a series of minor incidents misinterpreted, creating a clear and strong sense of infiltration and caused panic in a number of homes, including my home. My family, my children have grown up and they do not normally live at home, but these days, the day following the attack, they stayed with us, with their partners, and the family locked themselves in the safe room, called the guard, the army, while my son and I stood in the dark with kitchen knives, trying to find signs of intruders in the yard. After about 5 long minutes, remind you, 5 minutes, how long it was, security forces arrived and all infiltration was ruled out. However, when the incident ended, I saw that members of the household were confined, quiet in their rooms. The signs of fear did not let up even when it was clear that there was no room for immediate concern. In Hebrew, there's no word for the amount of fear that derives from terrorism, like in English, you actually say terror to signal the utmost level of fear. And that's how we felt. And at that moment, you could say that the fear already was still nested in the hearts, was no longer justified because the danger was ruled out, but still very present. Gently, I suggested to my children that we go out. It was difficult to convince them to sell it to them, but I explained and they would follow. We went to the garden in order to convince that there was no danger, but you know that opposite action should be done all the way. So we took, it was my idea to take a portable speaker and put music, and it felt like, what are you doing, Dad? Like they are all going to come. No, we're going to dance or hear the music, and we're going to talk aloud. So we oppose the urge to hide, and about 10 minutes later, everything was all right. And for me, it was very strong demonstration. First, I think the strongest in my life, to see how effective for them it was to contradict the sense of danger that was not justified by the moment. And another story from last week. Last weekend, I attended a music event, which in many ways was similar and evoked connotation for the Nova Music Party. On that day, a week ago, it became known that the Hamas leader Sinwar had been finally killed in Gaza Strip. In the evening, on the dance floor, so that was contribution, Rega. Yeah. In the evening, on the dance floor, I saw a young woman dancing with 2 lights chained in her hands. That's not her. That's just an illustration. She was beautiful, looked happy, and danced with full participation. I thought in my heart that more than the elimination of this Al-Qaeda terrorist, the picture of the young woman at this party could be considered the victory picture of the entire country. I went to her and shared my thoughts with her. Then she revealed to me that she herself survived the Nova, unlike her best friend in the world who was murdered there. I looked at the young people dancing and thought how hard it is to return to this situation full of triggers and memories. And indeed, here and there, one could also notice people struggling to find their place, or moments of tears when it was evident that deep sadness was rising. And yet, the adherence to music, dance, expression was very convincing. I thought in my heart that opposite action as something that is required at the national level. This, of course, should happen mindfully, moderately, and staying dialectical, since at other moments it is necessary, appropriate, and possible to feel deep sadness and other difficult emotions. I just want to talk about two more skills. So one is very trivial, is a
Can I just say something? It reminds me of the survivors of rape, that they have the walk at night in the alleyways, take back the night.
Can you say it again?
I work with a lot of rape victims, so they have a thing called take back the night, when they go out in the dark and they walk strong.
Exactly.
And showing themselves that they have power and they don't have to be afraid.
To me, it was so
We
strong.
will dafka dance.
Right. It was so strong because I was not in the Nova, and normally I don't go to such events, but from time to time I want to. And it was so difficult for me because I thought, am I in a dream? Where are the terrorists? When are they supposed to come? Are they supposed to come now or 1 hour from now? And they were just dancing as if everything is normal. And I thought to myself, this is normality, this is victory. But of course, we have to stay dialectical. And two last comments. One is all the way that we prepare ourselves ahead of time. So this is from Pikud HaOref, all that you need to have with you. And people might also think of alternative way of supplying electricity. Some people, like me, they carry a gun now. They didn't carry a gun before, but you know, think of cope ahead. Just carrying a gun is not enough, because what the skills ask us is to really think it through. To think, okay, I'm standing here. What if there's alarm now? And I have kids. How am I going to take them? Where I'm going to take them? To really contemplate the next step and to be exposed to the scene entirely. So the same thing with a gun. It's not enough to carry a gun. You have to think how you're going to be using it if you need to. And the last one, Zachi? No? I think that's it.
Hope ahead.
Yes, so coping ahead and problem solving are quite the same. These are all ways that involve planning for the scenario, but planning can be, as a matter of fact, like preparing water and medication and communication, but it should also, how am I going to sleep with my family in the safe room if I need to? How am I going to tell them stories, or what am I going to tell them about what's happening? I feel that I had to rush, but I'm satisfied that I'm finished. So these were my observations around how I'm trying to use skills in our crazy day-to-day life. Thank you.